Everybody, this is Matt Mayoko from NBC Sports Bay Area checking in on a Tuesday Players Day off. 49ers getting ready to get back to work on Wednesday to face the Green Bay Packers. And so every Tuesday at NBC Sports Bay Area, I do something that we call 49ers overreactions. And I've switched over to Blue Sky. And so got some great overreactions or just reactions, period. And then I kind of sort through it and pick out five or six to which I respond and I comment whether it's an overreaction or not. So I'm going to get to that and also have some questions or some topics that people want me to hit. I posted something on Blue Sky. So if you're not over there on that app, or if you are on that app, please be sure to check me out and give me a follow there. Also, please give me a follow here at YouTube, where you can subscribe. Please turn on the notifications, like, comment, all of the above. And a reminder, this is brought to you by Kenyon Club Brewery. It's a brewery, it's a beer garden, great menu of food, great menu of beers, a lot of selections there. And it's a family-friendly atmosphere in Moraga, so you can bring the whole family out. You can watch a game, you can do anything you want out there, bring the family dog. And it's coming soon to the Livery in Danville. So that should be opening fairly soon here. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm sure I will keep you posted as well. So on the topic of 49ers overreactions, and obviously this individual is getting some heat among the fan base for how the 49ers have gone 5-5. And that's Kyle Shanahan. And so one of the overreactions was Shanahan's offense is no longer unique enough to be a reason to keep him as head coach. And so the first part of that is, yeah, it's no longer unique because a lot of teams have copied the Kyle Shanahan system, or they've hired coaches with a background in that. And on a story that was written during the summer, a late summer training camp, Matthew Paris at NOLA.com covers the Saints, and he wrote that at least 18 NFL teams run offenses that are directly influenced by Kyle Shanahan or his offshoots of that style. So, from the sense that it's no longer unique, that's absolutely correct. However, the whole notion of firing Kyle Shanahan or moving on from him, it just seems, I don't know, whatever the words you want to use, probably ridiculous when you consider the success the 49ers have had. And I realize you don't have to tell me. I know they haven't won a Super Bowl in whatever, 30 years. But I also have seen where the 49ers have been a constant player deep into the postseason, making it to the NFC Championship game at least in four of the past five seasons and two Super Bowl appearances. So, I've seen where other people say, well, the 49ers have reached their peak, under Shanahan. And so if the peak is making it to the Super Bowl twice, and granted, having opportunities to win those Super Bowls and letting them get away, I don't know how you can say, well, they can only get so far as leading in the fourth quarter or leading in overtime of a Super Bowl, and they can't do anything beyond that. Um, do I have my issues with Shanahan? Of course, on occasion. But I also have covered this team long enough to know that he's a really good coach, and he's probably the best coach that I've covered in the 30 years as far as just making players better and teaching the game. And, I think he's immune. Well, heck, and I'm even thinking along the lines of, Mike Silver, who I have a great deal of respect for, wrote a book about Kyle Shanahan and the influence he and his father have had on the game. So if you probably don't want to read it now, but it's a really insightful book. And when you talk about the offense, let's not forget the 49ers. And again, you can cut this up in any kind of way you want, but when it comes to total yards, which is the general way where you rank offenses and defenses, the 49ers have the number two ranked offense in the league. So it's not like that offense has completely fallen apart. However, I will say that the offense has kind of fallen apart at very inopportune times, such as in the red zone, where they've settled for way too many field goals and not enough touchdowns or not enough extra points. And then in the game against Seattle, not being able to close that game out. So in their losses, the 49ers have definitely stalled offensively when they shouldn't have. But when you talk about the number two offense in the NFL, only the Baltimore Ravens are gaining more yards per game than the 49ers, who are right at the 400-yard mark, 300 and basically 90 yards, 399 yards, I guess, to be exact. And the 49ers actually offensively rank ahead of the Detroit Lions. So uh, the one thing that I would say too is, he's coming up. This is the eighth year of the Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch regime. And Bill Walsh had this kind of philosophy that coaches had to move on after 10 years. He called it, the 10-year rule. And why I think Shanahan is immune to the 10-year rules because he's not a rah-rah coach. He's not the kind of guy that, has the same sayings over and over and the chants in the locker room and all of that stuff. His message is kept fresh by staying in the present. So when the 49ers have a difficult loss like they did against Seattle, where obviously Shanahan was partly responsible, and you could say maybe more responsible than anybody else for that loss. It's not, hey, let's win one for the Gipper. It's let's sit down, let's analyze what happened and how we correct mistakes. So one of the first things I learned was that, players just want to be coached by someone who can make them better and who can teach them the game. And that's where Shanahan's biggest strength lies, is that, he's not saying the same message over and over and over again. And players roll their eyes and they say, oh, we've heard this before. What he's doing, as he did on Monday, was that he sits down, shows the film, and explains where mistakes were made, how things could have been better. I know a lot of fans believe that he doesn't take accountability for his own mistakes, and that might be true. But when he's able to sit down and explain what happens, that gets players' attention in a way that, giving a rah-rah speech doesn't. So, I think to Andy Reid and, Shanahan, like I said, they've been to the playoffs. They've made deep playoff runs. I don't know that they'll get into the playoffs this year. My guess is that they won't, because they haven't shown to be made of playoff material this season. Next year is a whole new year. And when you have a coach who's as smart as he is, he would be able to make the adjustments. And I think he has made adjustments every year that he's been the head coach of the 49ers. And he will be tasked with being the one who makes the adjustments next year. It's certainly not a time when the 49ers would want to move on unless he just loses complete control of the locker room. And I haven't seen that yet. But I don't think at this pivotal stage in the franchise, they're just going to maybe turn the page on Brock Purdy, bring a new head coach in who hasn't worked with Purdy, who would have to either cast him aside and say, I don't want you, I'm going to go find another quarterback. So it just doesn't make sense on so many different levels why the 49ers would even entertain the thought of moving on from Kyle Shanahan. But I would say that, the leash, I guess, gets a little bit shorter each year, as it did with Andy Reid. You look at him, he was with the Philadelphia Eagles for 14 seasons, and he went to the playoffs 9 times in 14 seasons and only one Super Bowl appearance with Philadelphia. And he was fired after the 2012 season. He wasn't out of job long. The Kansas City Chiefs hired him immediately for the 2013 season. And then it was the sixth playoff trip with Kansas City that he won his first Super Bowl. And now the Kansas City Chiefs under Andy Reid can't stop winning Super Bowls. Clearly, that has a lot to do with Patrick Mahomes. But I kind of look at it that way. I mean, there will be a time when Kyle Shanahan is not coaching the 49ers. And my guess, if that happens anytime in the next 5 or 6 years, he would not sit out a season. He would be hired immediately. Okay, so that's my thought on that, kind of the overreaction. Check out my overreaction piece at NBC Sports Bay Area, by the way. And so I did ask for some questions or some topics to address on Blue Sky. Someone wants to know about the Packers secondary. I will admit I have no idea what's going on with the Packers secondary. I haven't even started looking at them yet. Evan wants to know, what are your thoughts on building the O line? Hard to imagine telling me last year we would draft a star guard and the O line would potentially be worse. Oh, I don't think the offensive line is worse this year as opposed to a year ago. I mean, again, I don't watch every game in the NFL, but I think every fan base thinks that their offensive line is the worst in the league. And this will, I'm going to mention PFF. And I know a lot of people have their issues with PFF, but what I use PFF for is just to get a barometer of the rest of the league. It's the same people grading every game film, looking at every play, assigning a grade to every play. And although they might not know what the specific assignment on every offensive lineman is, I think it does give you a general idea. And I know there's a lot of talk about Colton McKivitz and Jake Brendel. In fact, there is a question about Jake Brendel that I'll right here. Do the 49ers completely need to rethink Jake Brendel? Jake Brendel is, I think, middle of the pack in the NFL. I believe he ranks as the number 13 center in the league. Um, Actually, he's 16th among centers who have played at least half of their games. The 49ers offensive line pass block efficiency ranks 13th in the league, and they are number one in run blocking. So when you look at Colton McKivitz, he is ranked as the seventh best right tackle in the NFL. Trent Williams is ranked as the fourth best left tackle in the NFL. So I guess my point is that is the offensive line probably the weakness of the offense? It probably is, yes. Is the offensive line probably the weakness of almost every team in the NFL offensively? I'd say yes, it is. So will the 49ers address the offensive line in the offseason? I think they will. And whether that means a first round pick, I wouldn't think a first round pick because right now it looks like 49ers will be drafting in the middle of that first round. But I think maybe second round, third round, fourth round, that's what you're looking at. If they can get somebody like Dominic Puni in the third round, maybe somebody who has that guard center flexibility, um, or a tackle in the second round, because Colton McKivitz is, I think he has another year left on his contract. Trent Williams is at the age where you have to start making plans for life without him. I've mentioned before that Puni has tremendous versatility and flexibility, being able to play almost every position on the offensive line. So I don't know that they'll keep him at right guard for the future, but I would just say that um, building the offensive line is something that, yeah, they'll have to look into. But I would also say that they're in better shape than a lot of other teams when it comes to the offensive line. Now, I do expect them to lose Aaron Banks in free agency this offseason. So they will need to find either a starting offensive lineman who's outside the building or rely on somebody like Spencer Burford or Nick Stickel or Ben Barch to step in and be a starter next year. So that's my thought on the offensive line. Um, they've often gone with the skill player or defense over the offensive line, but I would say that the offensive line and defensive line is something that the 49ers need to improve upon. I just think back a couple years ago. Remember when the 49ers opponents, whenever they'd play the 49ers, they would lose the next game. I think that was the 2022 season. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments section. but I believe it was 2022 where every team that faced the 49ers, it was 2022. Every team that faced the 49ers, if they played the following week, they lost. And that was from week one all the way to the end of the season. And that was because, and I don't think it was a coincidence. I mean, there was some luck involved, I'm sure, the way the schedule set up and everything else. But the way the 49ers played a very physical brand of football with their offensive line, with their defensive line, they would flat out beat teams up and they would leave them battered and broken for the next game. And that this team isn't like that. This team is not a physical team like that team 2 years ago. The offensive line isn't as physical and as rugged. The defensive line certainly isn't. So that might be a priority for the 49ers to get back to that very physical brand of football. Here's a question from Matthew. What does Kyle need to do with his coaching staff to get it right? Special teams is always bad, and he doesn't prioritize it. Well, a couple of years ago, they did prioritize it when they signed George Odom. They signed Oren Burks as free agents. I don't know. We'll have to see how the rest of the season plays out. At this point, I wouldn't necessarily expect there to be any wholesale coaching changes. Nick Sorensen running the defense, there's scrutiny there, deservedly so, just as there's scrutiny with the offense and there's scrutiny with special teams. None of those areas of the team have been playing at a high level, and there's reasons for that with the injuries and everything else. And, an injury on defense means that a guy who is supposed to be a core special teams player is now starting on defense. Like, for instance, Malik Mustafa. Malik Mustafa would have been a core special teams player from the beginning. Ronaldo Green, same. And so and Ronaldo Green still is a special teams player. But, whenever there's an injury on offense or defense and a backup has to then step into the starting lineup, that means that special teams is weakened because generally that player who's now starting loses his spot or is doesn't have a spot on special teams anymore, so that he can concentrate on offense or defense. So we'll see what the 49ers have in store. I think it was pretty obvious at this time last year, just because of the disconnect between Steve Wilks as defensive coordinator and Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. It was pretty clear that there was going to be a change made at the end of the season, almost regardless of how it turned out. And that change was made. I don't get the same sense this year with a significant disconnect. And that was a question that who is it? Thomas Store. Thomas Store asked too about a change at DC. We'll see how the final 7 games play out. That'll have a lot to do with it, but it does not seem as obvious this year that a change is in the works there. As far as Deebo Samuel, but Thomas Store asked about, or Thomas Ader, I'm sorry, Thomas Ader. Nothing's happening there. I mean, he is scheduled to make a very small amount next year, only 1.7 base salary. It'll be the final year of his contract. So for the 49ers, I don't see them moving on from Deebo Samuel, and their hope would be that he comes back next year. Well, first off, their hope is that he has a great second half of the season, a final 7 games, and then sets himself up for a good year next year, which would be a contract year. But, next year, they would need him and Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, and then to see what happens when Brandon Ayuk comes back. If there's one move, maybe this is a topic for another YouTube video, but, I was skeptical whether the 49ers would sign Brandon Ayuk to a long-term deal, just because I just don't think it makes a ton of sense to give wide receivers huge contracts. I think the way the wide receiver market has blown up, I just don't think wide receivers are nearly as valuable as the cap space they eat up. So I know they tried to trade him, or at least they had some deals in the works, but that would have required the Brandon Ayuk agreeing to a contract with another team. That never happened. Finally, 49ers and Deebo Samuel got that deal done. And I just don't know that that was, um, I just don't know that that's the smart play. I mean, Kansas City had an opportunity to keep Tyreek Hill for a long time with a huge contract, and they decided that it was in the best interest of the team to move on from him, get some draft picks, but just not pay that big of money to a wide receiver. And Tyreek Hill is a special wide receiver. I just think with the influx of wide receivers coming in from college every year, you can piece that position together with talented guys, and I don't think it hurts you. Question: does Drake Greenlaw get in before Buffalo? The thinking now is that 49ers will open the practice window for Greenlaw next week, and that he potentially, if he has a good week of practice, could play against the Buffalo Bills. Is Brock Purdy regressing? I don't know that he is. I think that it's just part of being a quarterback in the NFL. I mean, you look at some of the quarterbacks, who rate lower than him as far as the productivity. I mean, are people in Houston wondering if CJ Stroud has regressed? His numbers aren't as good as as Brock Purdy's. Jordan Love's numbers aren't as good. Patrick Mahomes' numbers aren't as good. So Brock Purdy's right now closer to middle of the pack as far as passer rating, which takes into account all of the significant stats, yards per attempt, touchdown, interception ratio, and completion percentage, all that stuff. So um, I don't know. I don't think Purdy has played as well as he did last year, pretty obviously. He just appears to be just a tick slow. Whether it's I can't tell you the reasons for that. I think the defenses have made adjustments where the 49ers need to then recalibrate and adjust back and do some things to burn those teams. Um, but I mean, I guess you could say he's regressing. I don't know if he's regressing. I think that he's, just the production isn't there. But I still think that, everybody in the building has a high degree of optimism and confidence that Purdy is the long-term starting quarterback for the 49ers. Because even in what I think we would consider, a year where he's regressed, he's still, top half of the league in the NFL as far as quarterback production. I think this year as a whole, I mean, there's guys who are just absolutely tearing it up, but I think as a whole, defenses are ahead of the offenses at this point. Um, Here's another question along those lines. It looks like yak yards have gone down significantly. Is Brock throwing into tighter windows? Yeah, I just think that the way defenses are playing the 49ers, taking away the middle of the field more. I think the 49ers did have some chunk plays with yards after the catch against Tampa Bay. But the scheme that Seattle ran with the two shell that Kyle Shanahan talked about, they really took away the big play, the plays down the field, the yards after the catch, and all of that. So Seattle played a really good brand of football on Sunday, and I think the 49ers are hoping that Seattle continues to play a good brand of football because they have a game coming up against the Arizona Cardinals, who lead the NFC West with a 6-4 record. So big week coming up for the 49ers facing Green Bay. Um, I don't know. I guess I kind of feel guilty. I'm not guilty, but I kind of feel weird even talking about the playoffs. So I won't mention playoffs, but 49ers are 5-5 along with Seattle and the Rams. And then, of course, the Arizona Cardinals with a 1-game lead on all three of those teams. Okay, well, once again, thank you for watching this video. Thanks for your help in supplying me with some content for this one on Blue Sky. And that is it for now.